Now to part 2 of our interview with famed Australian author Di Morrissey.
Among your 28 novels, can you recommend 2 or 3 of them to scholars and students of Australian studies in China and explain why they are your choices?
Well, I think it's still my most popular book when it was number 5 that I wrote, which is Tears of the Moon, the first one I set in Broome. And that is set around it's a tiny little dot way on the top of the Kimberley coast in a very remote area that at that time there were no tourists, nobody ever went there, but it's where the pearling industry started in Australia from Mikimoto had started in Japan, but it had not really been an industry here. And we had the Japanese pearl divers come over. We had moccasins. We had a lot of Asian influence that developed this extraordinary, colourful history of the pearling industry. So I went to Broome and stayed there for several months to do the research. Now, Broome is probably one of our most top 3 destinations to visit in Australia, but it has this very wonderful, multiracial, interesting, colourful history. So I wove a present story, a modern story, in against the background of the pearling industry. And Tears of the Moon was what they call my breakout book. It was the book that made my name internationally, and I went into hardcover, and hopefully it will be a television series at some point soon. So Tears of the Moon is, everyone says, it's their favourite book. So there's Tears of the Moon. Then there's a book called Rain Music, which is set on the Cape York in Queensland. And that also deals with some back history. I don't always have old history in my books. Some are very modern, but that also has a lot of the gold prospectors that came out from China, exploring when gold was first discovered in Australia, and that's very colourful history. So I think there would be a lot that people could relate to, and probably the other one would be The Plantation, which is a book set in near your home roots, Pookong, in Singapore and Malaysia. So, but it's I think even they start in a modern time, and then the characters discover the history of a place, which is, I think, what if you have the time as a tourist to go and look at these beautiful and interesting places, but it's when you know the history and the people's stories that make it a much richer visit.
I really enjoy Tears of the Moon and your sensitive treatment of the historical relationship between the indigenous communities and people from Indonesia, the Moccasin fishermen, and of course Chinese, Japanese pearlers, and the Afghan camel drivers.
Yes.
And that, I think, multicultural past of our Australia is an important reminder as we try to come to terms with the changing Australia.
Very much, very much. I think what is it that, to understand the present, you must understand the past. But you can see why it would make such a good television series, don't you think?
I think so. And I would say, probably your first book to be translated into Chinese, the Chinese readership would welcome, and I think benefit from an understanding of that very rich and historical background.
I think it was surprising that a lot of Australians had no idea either, that because, they're wonderful characters and brave people that came from so far away in the hope of following a dream and making riches, and some stayed, some went back, and some had tragic lives. So, but they're just part of the fabric of the history. They're not like important people that we learn about in school. So I think that learning this colorful history about each place that has a history that maybe we never would know, that by reading my books, that's what people enjoy. So often someone will say to me when they finished reading my books that they're entertaining, they feel like they've been to the place, but equally they always say, and I never knew that about, they've learned something.
You are only one of a small handful of creative writers in Australia who have succeeded financially as a novelist. What are the biggest challenges for aspiring writers in small markets, and how do they overcome the challenges?
Oh, Pookong, small or big, it's the same. You just want to get published. I mean, it's nice to be published and have a big publisher print a lot of books and sell them everywhere. One thing now, it's very, it's getting a book can be published, but getting it to the readers, unless it gets written up in the newspapers, and if you're new, you don't get written up unless you've written an extraordinary book. But I mean, we all grow and do things better as we go along. But now there are so few bookshops. I just find that books online, and you have to know what to look for. It's not like standing in a bookshop and going along the shelves and picking a book up and making a find. So the important thing for a new writer who's been published, because getting published is a whole other issue. But if you are lucky enough to get published, then you need publicity. You need people to know about your book. So in one case, maybe social media can help in that. But I think unless you can look at the book yourself and look at the back and go, oh, that sounds good. It's very hard to the selling and the promotion now in a very competitive marketplace. But what has been one very good thing from COVID is that people have rediscovered or have had the time locked down to read again and to read books. And so that, I think, is really wonderful. I don't believe books will ever disappear. There's just new ways of doing things. And often we find that we go back to old things. And so, I can only say to people that want to write. You just put it down, and even just for your family. And it is important that we tell our own family stories as well, because no one writes letters and no one will know what my grandparents did if we don't tell someone or put it down in writing. So to just do it and to sit down and put pen to paper or computer to pad is very, very important. We must never lose our stories.
The other important, I think, challenge and something that younger writers would benefit from your experience is your discipline. As a writer, you have been able to almost every year publish a new work of writing. How do you ensure that discipline?
Journalism was a really wonderful training. They didn't have creative writing courses when I wanted to start writing. So I started work as a journalist, and that was really one of the best things that I could have done, because I learned to do the research and interview people and collect information. But I think you still have to have that storytelling gift. But I also learned the discipline of a deadline. When I lived in that funny little beach town of Byron Bay, there were many people sitting on the beach and surfing, and they were all writing a novel, and they're all there 5 years later, still doing the same thing. You have to sit down, and even, I think it was Somerset and Warm, who said, just write your name over and over and over, but just start writing, write something. pretend you're writing a letter to a friend, start to tell a story. So the sitting and doing it. So that discipline was really good for me. So I made office hours. I get to my desk by, 6:30, 7 in the morning, and I get up and down for cups of tea. But basically, I put in a full day's work, and that's been proven to work very well.
I like that quote from someone said, "Mourn about writing your name over and over." It's something that we as academics could share with our students who often, suffer from a writer's blocks in getting their assignments done.
Yes, I had no time for the writer's block. I was very, very lucky. Luck plays a very, very big role in life. I left television wanting to write a book. So what I did was I thought, I'm not known as a writer. People didn't know. They knew me from being on television as a reporter. They didn't know that about writing. So I had this story set in the outback of Australia, where I had been filming in Longreach in outback Queensland, and I met absolutely some wonderful characters, and I thought, ooh, this would make a wonderful television series because it's so spectacular, the scenery. So I sat down and I wrote about 30 pages as a television film idea. And then I thought, well, because my mother worked in television, I knew a lot of people. I thought, oh, we'll make this as a TV series, and then a publisher will ask me to do the book. However, the television screenplay, a friend happened to take it and gave it to a literary agent, who took it to a publisher, who asked me to turn it into a novel. So I was handed a contract to told, go away and write a book. So then I had to use an Australian expression, put my money where my mouth is. And I had to sit down and do it. And luckily for me, after 18 months, I had a book, and I was lucky it was published. And I was lucky that other people liked it.
I want to pick up another aspect of your journalistic training and experience. You have noted in the past that you have, before COVID-19, tried to allocate quite lengthy time of each year in particular localities in order to better understand their histories and their daily life. Using the journalistic investigation method, including immersing in localities and local histories, what some of the successes, and whether there are again challenges in using that method of developing stories?
Well, it works for me. I know I have a lot of friends who are authors. Tom Keneally, I think you have talked to my friend Tom. Tom sits in his office at home, and he used to have a wonderful view of the beach, and he used to turn his desk around so he couldn't see the beach. So he didn't get, wanting to go and walk on the beach. And he was very disciplined, and he would stay in his office. But for me, I have to go and spend a lot of time in the place. I know Tom travels too, but for me, I actually go and live in the place, and that's where I find all of those, those threads to do that, to find doing the research. My children used to get very cranky with me because we would go on holidays. We would go to Hawaii, we would go somewhere nice for a holiday. And as soon as we get there, I'd go, oh, this would be a good place to write a book about. So I see the world through everywhere I go. This could be a book. That's just how I see the world. And then I decide, oh, this place has drawn me here for a reason, and I live there and talk to people. And I think that, as I said before, the journalism skills come into getting people to sit down and tell you their story. Everybody has a story they don't often tell, but if they tell you, and it's okay. I mean, sometimes you have to change the names and the places and make them look different. you find lots of wonderful things to write about.
You have worked in the print and electronic media internationally, nationally, and in your local community of Wingham in the mid-north coast of New South Wales. What do you see as the main challenges of news reporting and news analysis in Australia?
The monopolies. I find it very disheartening now that the newspaper industry is really monopolized by one or two major players who have bought up all of the newspapers. There's political influence involved. So quite often the news that we are all reading has an inherent, bias in a way. So it's very hard for us to make our own judgment. And as I said earlier, social media is dangerous and can be misleading and frivolous, or, the local newspapers, the local radio stations, the local information is really important. It's what we learn about what is happening in our own backyard with our own local councils, and there's state government and the national, the federal government. But if you need to have an honest and fearless voice that can be honest and straight and not have influence from, other outside elements. And so those small local newspapers and radio stations that are run for and by locals are really, really important. And when I saw what was happening in this area, where all of the little local newspapers were bought up by a big conglomerate, and they said the same, all had the same thing in the same papers and lots of advertising. And the little local things were not really being written about or exposed because of fear of upsetting, the local government. So to have a fearless and independent press is vital to not just a town, but to the entire country. So I was unhappy with what was happening here, so I started my own little local newspaper, and it's going very well. It does take up a bit of time, but it's worthwhile doing. People trust it, which is nice.
It's wonderful work you are doing, and your comments about the monopolies of media ownership. I think the impact is perhaps even more severe in a country like Australia, which has a relatively small population, and the concern, of course, has been highlighted by recent comments by former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. And it's good to see that you, as a committed citizen, is trying to resist that dominance.
And a woman. Makes it harder. But yes, I think it is up to each of us. And once I made the first step with my local paper, and people found it's free. So, it just is handed out in every shop and cafe. And so it reaches a lot of people. Then other people started coming to me with their stories or what they knew or what they wanted to be made public. And so it has become a big conversation among all of us that help and help each other and make us aware of where things that might not seem right, we catch it early. So you have to be a little brave, but it is it is worth doing, because if we remain silent, we're lost.
Dai, you mentioned about how your grandmother and mother were wonderful role models for you when you grew up as a young person and subsequently with your career choice. I am very impressed by your two children's achievements, both with PhDs, and one I understand is a highly respected international scholar on Asia, especially Asian Buddhism. And you too, with your work in Myanmar and the school that you set up in Myanmar, I think perhaps shows an interest in Buddhism as a philosophy or as a religion. Can you, perhaps comment on those aspects of your philosophical or personal or family interest?
I think, well, my son, with his interests, both my children have influenced and taught me and opened doors for me, which has been really wonderful. But their father was an American Foreign Service officer, so we were in the diplomatic service. So therefore, that's the reason we would go and live in so many different posts around the country. And I was able to work because of my skills, because quite often in Asia, we were in hardship countries, because Guyana was another one that was interesting we had help, so I could go out to work. So I would again work in journalism or advertising or television or radio. And that way I got under the surface of I wasn't just in the diplomatic, circles, that I was mixing, in the local economy and meeting people. And as a result, my children grew up with that international schooling and an appreciation of many other cultures. So when they were time to go to university, their interests were already there in philanthropy. And for my son, with the Buddhist culture, he spent a lot of time in India as well. And so his specialty is early century Buddhist art. He's more an art historian. He teaches at the University of Georgia in America. And my daughter became a health specialist, and she has had a great, her last job has been running the Schweitzer Foundation in Texas to train the leaders of the future to go to do good things, as Albert Schweitzer set the example. So they are extraordinary children. And I now have wonderful, they both have 2 children, and I have 4 grandchildren, whom we also try to open the doors to other cultures and other things. I think it's one good thing about travel and taking children to be exposed to other ways of life, other food, other languages. It's very enriching, and I think it makes us all better people.
Thank you, Dai. Thank you very much for sharing with us your rich professional, personal, and family history. I'm sure our Chinese audience and our Chinese readers would look forward to getting to know more about your writing, and that there will be opportunities when the public health situation improves for you to perhaps visit China and for them to meet you personally.
Oh, I would like that very, very much. I'm putting that on my agenda. And it's been lovely talking to you, Pookong, and very honoured to be part of the ASCOR Interview series. So thank you very much for asking me.